the belief that we are living in an orderly universe, that nothing happened to this Earth and the other planets since the beginning, that nothing will happen till the end, is a wishful thinking that fills the textbooks, and your textbooks are still of Victorian vintage. Is any physicist here who would stand up and defend the proposition that only gravitation and inertia are in action in the solar system? But of all my heresies, this was the greatest. And let me ask you another question. Is the theory of uniformitarianism, which means that nothing what happened in the past could have happened if it doesn't happen today? On this is built the modern geology. On this is built the modern astronomy. On this is built the modern biology and theory of evolution. And so it is only wishful thinking that we are living in a safe, never perturbed solar system on a safe, never perturbed Earth.
Plate tectonics. The idea that our continents slowly move and collide to create mountains and fault lines has existed as a fact for only 50 years. It's kind of incredible to think about this, considering that mostly every human on Earth knows this term and, generally speaking, what it refers to. My point is not to refute plate tectonics, it is indeed real. However, the absolute recent introduction of this concept into the collective consciousness should make you question: do we really know that plate tectonics alone answers the geological questions of mountain building and fault line creation? Does mountain building only occur over millions of years, or is the slow process of plate tectonics punctuated by great paroxysms of nature? Rock is dated via stratigraphy, or layers, and this is done with the help of fossils. Rock helps determine the age of a fossil, and fossils help determine the age of the rock. The dating, of course, is completely predicated on the assumption that rock layers are uniform and formed over eons. Along the plains of Montana, one can find Chief Mountain, a massif stretching thousands of feet high. The impressive outcropping sits atop a mountain range that's newer in formation. According to geologist Reginald Daly, it has been thrust bodily upon the much younger strata of the Great Plains, then driven over them eastward for a distance of at least 8 miles. The Rocky Mountain front shows similar thrusting of older rock up through the newer, but it is the Alps in particular that shows titanic displacements of mountains. During the building of the Alps, gigantic slabs of rock, thousands of feet thick, hundreds of miles long, and tens of miles wide, were thrust up and then over, relative to the rocks beneath. The direction of the relative overthrusting movement was from Africa toward the main mass of Europe on the north. The visible rocks of the northern Alps of Switzerland have thus been shoved northward distances of the order of 100 miles. In Glarus, Switzerland, the lower formations in the Alps resides in the Paleocene, or the Age of Mammals. Their upper parts are Permian, which preceded the Age of Reptiles, and Jurassic, the Age of Dinosaurs. Velikovsky writes, "This impels to one of two conclusions. Either the division of rocks into sequences based on the fossils they contain is fallacious, or the old mountains were moved bodily and set onto the shoulders of more recent formations." The origins of the mountains is not explained, and still less is their thrust or shift across valleys and over the mountains. The Alps were shoved 100 miles into the north. Chief Mountain in Montana traveled across the plains and climbed the slope of another mountain and settled on top of it. All of the Glacier National Park in Montana and all the Rocky Mountain area up to Yellowhead Pass in Alberta moved for many miles. The mountains of western Scotland shifted from their places. The entire length of the Norwegian mountains showed a similar overthrust. What could have caused these mountains to travel across valleys and uphill with their masses of granite weighing billions of tons? No force acting from the inside of the Earth, pulling inwards or pushing outwards, could have created these overthrusts. Only twisting could have produced them. It could hardly ever have occurred if the rotation and revolution of our planet had never been disturbed. At a height of 8,780 feet above sea level, archaeologists in 2017 discovered pieces of tools and bows dating back to 4,000 years. Velikovsky writes, "In the Alps, caverns with human artifacts of stone and bone dating from the Pleistocene, the Ice Age, have been found at remarkably high altitudes. During the Ice Age, the slopes and valleys of the Alps, more than other parts of the continent, must have been covered by glaciers. Today, in Central Europe, there are great glaciers only in the Alps. The presence of men at high altitudes during the Ice Age seems baffling. Thousands of years ago, it is believed hunters used these elevated caves as refuge in the summer months, as prehistoric tools along with animals like the cave lion have been discovered." One cavern near the top of Ebenalp is 4,900 feet above sea level. It was occupied by a man sometime during the Ice Age, as artifacts have been discovered. Even more remarkable in respect to altitude is the cavern of Drakenloch at a height of 8,028 feet above sea level, where skeletons and bones of a now extinct bear was discovered. This is a steep, snow-covered massive, and both of these caves are in the very heart of the alpine field of glaciation. During this time, a massive continental ice sheet, thousands of feet thick, occupied the entire valley between the Alps and other mountain ranges like the Jura. Therefore, if one is to follow the standard geological picture of the Ice Age, in the same geological age between two advances of ice cover, during an interglacial intermission, human beings must have occupied caverns 8,000 feet above sea level. Did people decide to move into this region and occupy caves 8,000 feet up under such cold and inhospitable conditions that proliferated in the Ice Age? Or is it possible that during the time of occupation these caverns were not 8,000 feet above sea level, but rose to that height as the crust was rent and thrust upwards? Velikovsky writes, "The fact of the late upthrust of the major ridges of the world, when recognized, great perplexity among geologists who, under the weight of much evidence, were forced to this view. The revision of the concepts is not always radical enough. Not only in the age of man, but in the age of historical man, mountains were thrust up, valleys were torn out, lakes were dragged uphill and emptied."
The process known as plate tectonics occurs during continental drift. This example shows two large segments of continental crust colliding very slowly over millions of years. One land mass is forced underneath the other. To relieve the stress, mountain ranges are often formed in the overriding land mass, while earthquake-prone zones are formed below.
The mainstream geological view of Earth tells us that since the age of mankind, the mountains and oceans, the geology and topography has remained essentially constant. At the highest peaks have been found fossilized marine animals, shells, mollusks, and whale. The standard geological uniformitarian view holds that the Himalayas must be millions of years old, its massive height slowly rising over eons of plate tectonic movement. And yet, as Velikovsky says, in Kashmir there was discovered sedimentary deposits of an ancient sea bottom that was elevated at places to an altitude of 5,000 feet or more, and tilted at an angle of 40 degrees. The basin was dragged up by the rise of the mountain. The deposits contained fossils from the age of man. The theory of the Ice Age suggests that, for whatever reason, the invasive ice sheet stretching down from the poles began to melt and retreat, only to expand, then retreat. These are known as the interglacial periods. The reasons why these narratives exist is because of fossils, because we find massive sea turtles, elephants, and tigers in the Himalayan plains, and as the ice retreated, animals migrated north, and as the ice expanded, they migrated south. And yet, curiously, we do not see animals living in these regions today, again, a direct contradiction to the doctrine of uniformity. The Siwalik fossil bed stretches across the foothills of the Himalayas, with mountain ranges extending from 2,000 to 3,000 feet in height. Animal bones of species and genera, living and extinct, were found there in the most amazing abundance. Some of the animals looked as though nature had conducted abortive experiments with them and had discarded the species as not fit for life. The shell of a tortoise, 20 feet long, was found there. How could such an animal have moved on hilly terrain? Among other fossils found in these densely rich deposits were the hippopotamus, giant elephants, pigs, rhinoceroses, apes, and oxen. Many of these animals have gone extinct, and out of 30 species of elephants found in these fossil beds, only one remains in India today. Hundreds and thousands of entire trunks of petrified trees and huge logs lying around sandstone suggest the stripping of thickly forested areas. Animals met death and extinction by the elementary forces of nature, which also uprooted forests from Kashmir to India, China, threw sand over species and genera in mountains thousands of feet high. In the Andes of South America, we find the massive ancient megalithic city of Tiwanaku, which sits at an elevation of 12,500 feet in a region and altitude where scant resources like food would grow. The city is thought to have housed between 30 and 70,000 people, and much mystery remains of its massive stone-cut artifacts and masonry. If you look at Google Earth, you can see how the lake itself has since receded, as most likely, like any major civilization, it was built next to water. And not only that, but Lake Titicaca was at one point 360 feet higher nearing the edge of Tiwanaku. What does this mean? The land has since tilted, causing the waters of Titicaca to recede from what was once the shoreline closer to the ancient city, and there, one can find many raised beaches, which again shows the waterline was once higher. Is it not possible Tiwanaku was in fact at a lower altitude when a city of 70,000 people lived next to the water, and the mountain range was thrust upwards, causing the lake to recede and pull back from the shoreline of the city? Scientists have found whale and other marine fossils high in the Andes. The massive stone used to build the city were quarried for over 10 kilometers and weighing over 131 tons. Why build here? Did the Andes suffer a great paroxysm of nature like Chief Mountain, the Rockies, the Himalayas, and the Alps? Or did 70,000 people think it was a good idea to live at such a high altitude where surviving and sustaining themselves would be so difficult? The city of Tiwanaku was most likely built along the coast of the ocean, and during a displacement of the Earth's crust, the entire area was thrust upwards, leaving what was once a bay to be a lake. In 1834, Charles Darwin traveled to South America. Standing on what is now known as the Upsalada Pass, which is 7,000 feet above sea level, he looked down on the plain of Argentina from a little forest of petrified trees broken off a few feet above the ground and wrote, "It required little geological practice to interpret the marvelous story which this scene once unfolded, though I confess I was at first so astonished that I could scarcely believe the plainest of evidences. I saw the spot where a cluster of fine trees once waved their branches on the shores of the Atlantic, when that ocean, now driven back 700 miles, came to a foot of the Andes."